The jungle was alive with movement. Thick vines twisted around ancient trees, their roots sprawling like skeletal fingers over damp, uneven terrain. A heavy mist curled between the trunks, veiling the undergrowth in shifting shadows. Predators lurked in silence, waiting, but none were as skilled as the one moving effortlessly through the gloom. Zayara crouched low, her sleek, feline form blending seamlessly with the dark foliage. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. Her kind, New York Van Huntresses, had perfected the art of stalking prey across unforgiving landscapes. And now, she tracked something unlike any beast she had hunted before. A human. She had studied them from afar, fragile creatures, soft-skinned and primitive. Yet this one was different. He moved with an unhurried confidence, his presence at odds with the untamed wilderness surrounding him. No panic, no hesitation. He should have been prey, but something about him unsettled her. Daniel adjusted the strap of his pack, his sharp gaze scanning the jungle ahead. He had sensed the huntress hours ago. The weight of her stare pricked at his instincts like a phantom touch. Yet she remained unseen. Impressive. He smirked to himself. Let's see how long she can keep this up. Deliberately, he veered off the game trail, stepping over tangled roots and thick moss, leading her deeper into the wild. He wasn't running, just moving, his presence woven into the jungle's rhythm as if he belonged there. Zayara frowned. This was wrong. A true hunt ended in the prey's exhaustion. Their will broken before the final strike. But this human, he was luring her. Tension coiled in her muscles. Perhaps she had underestimated him. She advanced, silent as death. But as she moved to close the distance, the ground beneath her shifted, an unseen snare snapping tight around her ankle. Too late. She twisted, her body instinctively contorting, but the mechanism held. A whisper of motion, then a voice, deep and calm. Caught you. Zayara's head snapped up. Daniel stood just a few feet away, arms crossed, the corner of his mouth curved in amusement. Heat flared through her, anger, frustration, and something else she refused to name. With a sharp motion, she twisted free, muscles rippling as she flipped forward, landing in a predatory crouch. His expression didn't change. No fear, only quiet interest. She could kill him. A single movement, a flick of her wrist, her blade would find his throat. But she didn't. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The jungle murmured around them, whispering secrets in the rustling leaves. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. You've been following me all day. His tone was casual, but his stance was alert, ready. What do you want? Zayara straightened, studying him with narrowed eyes, to see if the rumors were true. Daniel's brow arched, and her tail flicked behind her, a small betrayal of her irritation. You are not what I expected. His grin was infuriating. I get that a lot. She tensed, fingers itching for her weapon. This human was too at ease. Why? You knew, she accused. You knew I was watching. Daniel nodded. You're skilled, but the jungle speaks to those who listen. A strange feeling settled in her chest, an unfamiliar, irritating warmth. This was not how the hunt was supposed to go. She took a step closer. He didn't move. His scent, earth, sweat, something distinctly human, filled her senses. Her kind did not form bonds with prey, did not hesitate before a kill. And yet, I could have killed you, she murmured. His eyes darkened slightly, a flicker of something unreadable passing over his face. You still could. A challenge, an invitation. For the first time, Zayara felt unsure of who was hunting whom.
The jungle held its breath. Zayara remained still, her golden eyes locked onto Daniel's, trying to decipher what lay beneath his unwavering stare. Humans were supposed to be predictable, fearful or reckless, either cowering or charging forward in desperation. But this one was different. He had turned her hunt into something unexpected. For the first time in her life, she wasn't certain who was the predator and who was the prey. Daniel tilted his head slightly, a hint of amusement still lingering in his expression. What happens now? Zayara's grip on her blade tightened. He wasn't afraid, but he wasn't foolish either. Every muscle in his body was coiled, ready to react if she lunged. The thought sent a strange thrill through her. I haven't decided, she admitted, voice low and smooth. A breeze stirred the leaves overhead, carrying the thick scent of damp earth and distant rain. The jungle's natural sounds crept back in, chirps of unseen creatures, the rustle of shifting branches, the faint hum of life continuing around them. Daniel took a step forward. Not aggressive, not careless. Just close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from him. Sayara's instincts screamed at her, attack or retreat. But she did neither. His voice was steady. If you were going to kill me, you would have done it already. Her tail flicked, betraying her irritation. Do not mistake hesitation for mercy. One side of his mouth curved up. And do not mistake curiosity for weakness. She inhaled sharply. This human. There was something about him, something raw and untamed. He wasn't like the others she had studied, their minds easy to break, their wills fragile. He was steady, unshaken, daring her to figure him out. Sayara stepped back, not in retreat, but to reassess. You are far from home, she observed, her gaze flicking over his worn clothing, the scratches along his forearm where the jungle had marked him. Alone. Why? Daniel exhaled slowly, considering his answer. I could ask you the same. She narrowed her eyes. You answer a question with a question. And you avoid answering altogether. A quiet tension stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Finally he sighed, rolling his shoulders. I was part of a crew. We were supposed to map out the jungle's terrain for future expeditions. His expression darkened slightly. Didn't go as planned? Sayara studied him, noting the subtle shift in his stance, the flicker of something guarded in his eyes. Your crew is dead. It wasn't a question. He nodded. Yeah. For a moment, she said nothing. Death was an expectation among hunters. It was the price of survival, the natural order of things. But humans, they clung to their losses, carried their grief like wounds that never fully healed. Yet he didn't look broken. Did you kill them? She asked, testing him. His gaze sharpened. No. Truth. She tilted her head. Then why are you still here? A slow breath left his lips. Because leaving would mean giving up. Something about the way he said it sent a shiver through her. He wasn't just surviving. He was choosing to fight against the odds, refusing to surrender to a fate that had already claimed his people. It was admirable. She hated that it was admirable. You intrigue me, human, she murmured before she could stop herself. Daniel huffed a soft laugh. Glad to hear it. I was worried I was boring you. Her lips curled slightly, an unfamiliar warmth rising in her chest. She forced it down. This was dangerous. She was a huntress, bound by the laws of her people. Attachment was weakness. Mercy was failure. And yet something in her gut told her that killing this man wouldn't bring the satisfaction of a successful hunt. It would feel like a loss. Sayara turned sharply. Come, she ordered. Daniel lifted a brow. Just like that? No explanation? You will follow, or you will be left behind. His smirk returned. And here I thought you were about to slit my throat. She glanced back at him, golden eyes gleaming in the dim light. If I change my mind, you will not see it coming. Daniel chuckled, falling into step beside her. I'll keep that in mind. As they moved deeper into the jungle together, an unspoken understanding settled between them. The hunt had changed. And neither of them knew where it would lead. The jungle thickened as Sayara led the way, her movements fluid and precise. Daniel followed, keeping pace despite the uneven terrain. Moonlight bled through the dense canopy in fractured beams, casting shifting shadows over their path. The silence between them was heavy, charged with something unspoken yet undeniable. He wasn't sure where she was leading him. He wasn't even sure why he was following. Rationality told him to be wary. She was still an enigma, a predator whose mercy could vanish in an instant. And yet his instincts whispered something different. She could have killed him. She hadn't. That meant something. Sayara's tail flicked, the only sign of her agitation. She was too aware of him. too conscious of the way his presence unsettled her. He should have been easy to dismiss, another human caught in a world too brutal for his kind. But Daniel was different. He wasn't afraid of her. He wasn't begging for his life or trying to prove himself dominant. He simply met her where she stood, unyielding, steady. And she didn't know what to do with that. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant rain. Somewhere nearby, unseen creatures stirred in the underbrush. The jungle was alive, watching, waiting. Daniel broke the silence first. "You still haven't told me where we're going." Sayara didn't look back. "Somewhere safe." He huffed a quiet laugh. "And yet I feel like I'm walking straight into a trap." She finally turned, her golden eyes sharp. "You are alive because I allowed it. If I wanted you dead, you would not see it coming." He met her gaze without flinching. "And if I wanted to run, you wouldn't be able to stop me." A slow smile curved her lips. "Try." The challenge hung between them, electric in the air. Daniel didn't move. He wasn't foolish enough to test her reflexes. He could tell she wanted him to, wanted an excuse to remind him of what she was, of what she could do. But that wasn't his game. Instead, he tilted his head. "You're used to being feared, aren't you?" The shift in her expression was subtle, but he caught it. The brief hesitation, the flicker of something deeper before she masked it with indifference. "I am a huntress," she said evenly. "Fear is my ally." Daniel stepped closer. "And yet you haven't used it against me." Her tail twitched again. He had a way of peeling through her defenses, slipping past the walls she had spent a lifetime building. It made her uneasy. She turned sharply. "We should keep moving." They walked in silence for a while, the sounds of the jungle wrapping around them. Eventually, the dense foliage gave way to a hidden clearing, a shallow cave nestled against a moss-covered cliffside. Sayara gestured toward it. "Here." Daniel arched a brow. "You've been here before." She nodded. "It is a resting place for those who know how to find it." He scanned the surroundings. The cave wasn't large, but it was dry and well hidden. More importantly, there were no fresh signs of predators nearby. It was safe. For now. As Daniel stepped inside, Sayara followed, keeping a deliberate distance. He crouched near the entrance, running a hand over the cool stone. "So, what now?" Sayara hesitated. She had expected him to ask for answers, to demand explanations she wasn't ready to give. Instead, he watched her with quiet patience, waiting for her to decide. She didn't like it. Didn't like the way he unsettled her. Didn't like the way she wanted to answer him. Her jaw tightened. "You will rest here. I will keep watch." Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. "You really don't trust me, do you?" She met his gaze. "Should I?" A pause. Then he smiled. "I haven't given you a reason not to." That was the problem. If he were like the others, if he were weak, cruel, arrogant, she could justify keeping her distance. But Daniel was none of those things. He was something far more dangerous. He was intriguing. She tore her gaze away. "Sleep, human." Daniel smirked but said nothing more. He leaned back against the cave wall, closing his eyes, his body relaxed but not vulnerable. He trusted her enough not to kill him in his sleep. Sayara settled near the entrance, her senses attuned to the jungle beyond. But her thoughts refused to quiet. This man was changing the rules of the hunt. And she wasn't sure if she was still the predator, or if she had already become the prey. Sayara had spent her life mastering patience, stalking prey for days, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But sitting at the entrance of the cave, listening to the steady breathing of a human who refused to fear her, that was an entirely different kind of test. Daniel had fallen asleep easily, his body at ease even in unfamiliar territory. It frustrated her. It fascinated her. He should be wary, should be tense, but instead, he rested as if he belonged here, as if he trusted her. Why? Her golden eyes flicked toward him in the dim firelight. His face, usually set with quiet amusement or sharp observation, was relaxed now, shadows playing along his jawline. He looked peaceful. It was an image that didn't fit with the Daniel she had tracked, fought, challenged. She hated how that unsettled her. A sharp rustle in the jungle snapped her attention outward. Her ears twitched, scanning the night. Something was close. Rising silently, she moved with the effortless grace of a predator, stepping out into the dense foliage. The jungle was alive with whispers of movement, the scent of damp earth thick in the air. She drew in a slow breath, parsing through the scents. Not an animal. Not human. Hunters. A low growl rumbled in her throat. Daniel woke to the sound, instincts flaring before his mind fully caught up. His hand reached for the knife at his side before he registered where he was, and who was making the sound. Zayara stood at the cave's entrance, her body tense, tail flicking in controlled agitation. "Trouble?" he murmured. Her eyes met his, glowing faintly in the darkness. "Not for me." He stood, rolling his shoulders. "For me, then? Perhaps." Her gaze flicked toward the jungle. "They are searching. You were not the only human in the crash." The words sent a sharp jolt through him. He had assumed, perhaps foolishly, that he had been the only survivor. Now, another possibility reared its head. Zayara watched his expression shift, her own unreadable. "Does that change things for you, human?" Daniel exhaled. "Depends. Are they here to save me?" She tilted her head, assessing. "Doubtful." That was enough. Daniel moved to her side, his stance shifting into readiness. "Then I guess we have a problem." The jungle held its breath. Zayara moved first, slipping into the shadows. Daniel followed, keeping his footsteps light despite the uneven ground. She was an effortless ghost, navigating the darkness with practiced ease. He was keenly aware of how much noisier he was in comparison, but if she was irritated by it, she didn't show it. They didn't need to wait long. The figures moved carefully, their dark silhouettes barely visible against the dense foliage. Their weapons glinted under the faint moonlight. Not soldiers. Not rescue. Daniel's jaw tightened. Mercenaries. Zayara remained crouched beside him, her eyes locked onto the figures below. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "They are hunting, not saving." Daniel nodded. "Which means I was never meant to leave this jungle alive." Her tail flicked once. "And yet you have." The meaning was clear. Because of her. His eyes met hers. A silent question. A silent answer. Then, like a coiled spring snapping free, Zayara moved. Daniel had seen her fight before, but this was different. There was no hesitation, no lingering restraint. She dropped into the clearing like a shadow-given form, silent and precise. Clawed hands flashed, cutting through the first mercenary before he could make a sound. Daniel didn't waste time. He grabbed a fallen blade, ducking as another enemy turned on him. The man was fast, trained, but Daniel had survived worse. He twisted, knocking the weapon aside before driving his own into the mercenary's ribs. The jungle swallowed their struggle. And when the silence returned, only Daniel and Zayara remained standing. She wiped her blade on the grass, golden eyes unreadable. "You are more capable than I expected." Daniel huffed a breath, wiping sweat from his brow. "You sound disappointed." Her lips curved slightly, but she didn't reply. Instead, she turned toward the bodies, her expression shifting into something more contemplative. "They were not here by chance," she murmured. Daniel frowned. "You think they knew where to look?" She nodded. "Someone sent them." That realization settled between them, heavy with implication. If someone had sent mercenaries this deep into the jungle, it meant Daniel's survival wasn't just inconvenient. It was a problem for someone. And that someone was still out there. Zayara exhaled slowly. "It would be safer for you to stay dead." Daniel met her gaze. "That an offer?" A flicker of something crossed her expression. Not amusement. Not quite concern. Something else. "No," she said quietly. Silence stretched between them, heavier than before. It wasn't just the weight of the fight, the realization that Daniel was marked for death. It was this shift between them, the undeniable understanding forming in the spaces between their words. Sayara had been the hunter. Daniel had been the prey. But now the lines were blurred. And neither of them knew what came next.